Picture a kid in 1985. It's summer. The front door swings open at 8 a.m. and doesn't swing back shut until the street lights come on. Nobody knows exactly where that kid is. Nobody is tracking their location on a phone app. Nobody has scheduled their afternoon into color-coded blocks of enrichment activities. That kid is just out there, somewhere, living. And their parents? They're inside, living too, not hovering, not helicoptering, not documenting every moment for posterity. That kid grew up. And here's the fascinating, complicated, deeply human part. That kid is now a parent, and they are doing something genuinely remarkable with everything they absorbed from that childhood. They are parenting in a way that no generation before them has ever had to attempt, with one foot rooted in the most unsupervised, emotionally unprocessed childhood in modern history, and the other foot planted firmly in the most psychologically aware, anxiety-riddled, everything is on the internet era of parenting that has ever existed. That is the world of the Gen X parent, and today we're going to get inside it. Gen X, roughly those born between 1965 and 1980, are now in their mid-40s to late 50s. Many of them are in the thick of raising teenagers or launching young adults into the world. And if you are one of them, or you love one of them, or you were raised by one of them, you already know there is something uniquely layered about how they show up as parents. Something that can look like contradictions from the outside, but makes complete psychological sense once you understand where it comes from. Let's start at the beginning, because the beginning is everything. Gen X children were, by nearly every measurable standard, the least supervised generation of children in American history. Latchkey kids, that was the term. You came home from school, let yourself in with the key on the string around your neck, and you figured it out. You made your own snack. You watched television nobody curated for you. You navigated boredom, conflict, loneliness and joy, largely without adult intervention. Your parents were working, often both of them, and the cultural expectation wasn't intensive parenting. It was resilience. Sink or swim. Handle it. Now here's what that does to a developing brain. Psychologists studying attachment theory, particularly the work built on John Bowlby's foundational research, tell us that children need consistent emotional availability from caregivers to build what's called a secure attachment base. When that availability is intermittent, inconsistent, or largely absent, children don't fall apart. They adapt. They become self-sufficient in ways that look impressive from the outside. They learn to self-soothe, to self-direct, to self-entertain. But underneath that capable exterior, something else gets encoded too. A faint but persistent belief that needing people is risky, that depending on someone emotionally is an exposure you can't quite afford. Fast forward 30 years. That self-sufficient kid is now standing in a school hallway, watching their own child struggle with something painful. And every instinct they have says, "You've got this. Figure it out." Because that's what kept them alive emotionally as children. But another part of them, the part that has read things and felt things and perhaps done some therapy, says, "Wait, is this the moment where I need to actually show up differently?" That internal negotiation between the parenting they received and the parenting they want to give is happening constantly in Gen X parents, and it is exhausting in the most human way possible. This is what psychologists call intergenerational transmission of parenting style. We tend to parent the way we were parented, not because we're lazy or unaware, but because those early models are encoded so deeply they feel like instinct. The brain essentially runs the old software as its default setting, and changing the default setting takes a level of conscious effort and self-awareness that Gen X parents are attempting at a cultural scale that is genuinely unprecedented. Here's what makes it even more interesting. Gen X didn't just experience emotional unavailability at home, they also came of age during one of the most culturally cynical periods in modern Western history. The 70s and 80s weren't exactly optimistic decades. Watergate, the Cold War, AIDS, economic instability. The cultural message embedded in the music, the films, the general atmosphere of the era was, trust nothing, expect disappointment. Irony is the only honest response to a world that keeps letting you down. Gen X absorbed that skepticism into their bones. It became part of their identity. Cool detachment, self-reliance, a dry humor that keeps vulnerability at arm's length. And yet these same people are raising children in the most emotionally articulate parenting era that has ever existed. They are watching millennials and Gen Z discuss attachment styles over brunch. They are encountering therapy speak in their children's vocabulary. They are being asked by their own kids, in terms they never had access to growing up, to process feelings, to name emotions, to apologize and repair. And something genuinely moving happens when a Gen X parent rises to that challenge, because it doesn't come naturally. It comes from a decision, a conscious, sometimes painful, sometimes clumsy decision to do something differently. And that kind of intentional change is one of the most psychologically courageous things a human being can attempt. But let's be fair to the complexity here, because Gen X parents also bring things to the table that are genuinely, powerfully good, things that more anxious, over-involved parenting styles sometimes miss. Research from developmental psychologist Wendy Grolnick and her colleagues on what's called autonomy-supportive parenting shows that children thrive when parents give them space to problem solve, fail, and recover independently. They develop stronger executive function, higher frustration tolerance, and a more resilient sense of self. The Gen X style of parenting, often described as more hands-off, more figure-it-out, less obsessively supervised, actually aligns remarkably well with what the science says children need to build psychological hardiness. The kid who navigates their own conflicts on the playground without a parent mediating every social micro-moment, that kid is building something real. Gen X parents also tend to be remarkably low on the performance parenting spectrum. They are, as a group, notably less invested in their children as extensions of their own status. They didn't grow up with social media audiences watching their family moments. They don't have the same compulsive need to document, curate, and broadcast their parenting wins. And that absence of performative pressure creates something genuinely rare in the modern parenting landscape. A household where the child doesn't feel like a project, where good enough is sometimes actually good enough, where the relationship isn't constantly mediated through achievement. Now, where Gen X parents genuinely struggle, and this is worth saying with real empathy, is in the territory of emotional expressiveness. Not because they don't feel deeply, they do, often more than they let on, but they were raised in homes where feelings were largely managed privately, where vulnerability was treated as weakness, where "I love you" was implied by the fact that there was food on the table and a roof overhead. The emotional vocabulary simply wasn't modeled for them in most cases. And now their children, who have grown up in a world where emotional literacy is practically a subject, are asking for a level of open, named, processed emotional engagement that Gen X parents can find genuinely disorienting. Not because they don't want to give it, but because they're essentially learning a second language as adults, in real time, under pressure. The good news, and there is real good news here, is that neuroplasticity doesn't have an expiration date. The brain's capacity to learn new emotional patterns, to build new relational habits, to rewire the defaults laid down in childhood, that capacity persists throughout the lifespan. Gen X parents who are doing the work of showing up differently than their own parents did are not fighting a losing battle. They are doing some of the most meaningful psychological growth work available to a human being. And their children, whether they know it or not, whether they say it or not, are benefiting from every uncomfortable, imperfect attempt. So here's where I want to leave you. Whether you're a Gen X parent, an adult child of one, or simply someone trying to understand the peculiar, layered, quietly heroic task of parenting across such a profound cultural divide. The generation that was told to figure it out is figuring it out. Slowly. In therapy, and in kitchens, and in uncomfortable conversations at midnight. They're doing it without a roadmap, because the roadmap their childhood gave them leads to a place they don't always want to go. And the fact that they're trying, that they're reading things, questioning things, showing up imperfectly but intentionally, that is worth something real. If any of this landed for you, drop a comment below. I'd especially love to know, if you're Gen X or you were raised by Gen X parents, what's one thing you think that generation genuinely gets right? Because I think the answer might surprise you. And if you want to keep exploring the psychology behind how the generations we were born into shape who we become, there's a lot more of that coming. See you in the next one.